represents the bitterness of bondage. When we were in the land of Israel, in the house of bondage. Does everybody have the unleavened bread? Okay. Unleavened bread signifies us. What's all bondage? It's also bondage. So you have two representations of bondage on your plate. And of course, somebody bless me. Does everybody have a piece of lamb? Okay, of course, this represents the lamb that was slain on the night of Pesach, and the blood that was placed upon the door, supposed to be obedient, that we may be passed over. But yeah.
So, y'all don't have to stand for this. I'm just going to say a blessing over the Seder. Excuse me. Baruch atah Abba Yahweh Malach Haolam Baba Kasha Barak Seder Pesach Chag Matstsâh Wa Hagafim. That is blessed you, Yahuwah Elohim, King of the universe. Please bless this Seder meal. Bless the matzah, or the unleavened bread, and the fruit of the vine. Total about Abba. Amen.
Amen.
All right, so we know according to the scriptures, it tells us that we were to eat the meal and we were to eat it in haste. And it says when you had the Passover, it was not supposed to be boiled or anything. It had to be roasted with fire. That's the reason why what we was eating for our dinner was different than this, because it was cooked actually over fire. It says you were to eat it with unleavened bread as well as with bitter herb. So we have a two-part that we do to the Seder. One is a representation of what Israel went through during the time of the actual Passover, when it actually happened. There was actually only one Passover. The Passover is what happened in Egypt when Yah delivered the children of Israel from Mitzrayim. Every other Passover after that was a memorial of remembering that particular Passover. So what we're doing now, being in obedience to that, we have, again, a portion of lamb, unleavened bread, and bitter herb. So at this time, we've already blessed it. So if you have your lamb in the representation of the Seder, we've not blessed it. You may not eat your, don't eat all your leavened bread, just eat a little piece of your leavened bread. We can go back to the leavened bread. But at this time, you can now start to dine on your lamb, as well as your bitter herb and a piece of your unleavened bread. Just take a bite of it, if you would. You get the chance to finish it off. It said eat it in haste. So eat it quickly. The lamb, unleavened bread, and the bitter herb. But save a portion of your unleavened bread.
So we supposed to see the whole thing down my range?
You don't bitter herb, you don't lamb. Even if you don't finish, we're going to finish before.
Okay.
So while y'all enjoying that, I'm now reading from the book of Matstsâh, commonly called Matthew's, chapter 26, starting verse 17. So now the first day of the feast of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Yahushua, commonly called Jesus, saying unto him, well wilt thou that we prepare to eat, for thee to eat the Passover. So one of the things is that we see that the disciples were preparing for the Mashiach before his death, the Passover. And it says this was the first day of unleavened bread. So when some people have confusion as to why do we go from Passover into unleavened bread, you can see precept on precept. They were doing it actually in the night of unleavened bread. They said the first day of unleavened bread, so they were eating this here with the Mashiach. It says, and he said, go into the city to such a man and say unto him, the master said, my time is at hand. I will keep the Pesach or the Passover at your house with my disciples. And the disciples did as Yahushua had appointed them, and they made ready the Passover. Now when the evening was come, he sat down with the 12. And as they did eat, he said, verily, I say unto you, that one of you shall betray me. And they were exceedingly sorrowful, and began every one of them to say unto him, Master, or Adonai, is it I? And he answered and said, he that dippeth his hand with me in the dish, the same shall betray me. The Son of Man goeth as it is written of him. But woe unto that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It had been good for that man if he had not been born. So in quick, we know it's talking about Judas, and Judas was the one who betrayed the Messiah. And one thing that we discussed last night, Judas was not a totally bad individual. He just still had a little leaven in him. That greed for the money, things wasn't moving exactly like he thought the Messiah was supposed to move, so he didn't fully roll with the vision, but he was walking with the Mashiach for a long time, which means he was living pretty righteous, but he just still had that old leaven, a little leaven left in him, which caused him to betray the Mashiach. That's the reason why we're trying to purge ourselves so that we will not be the Judas of the modern era, and we do not betray the Mashiach and lose our salvation. Reading on. 25. Then Judas, which betrayed him, answered and said, Master, is it I? And he said unto him, You have said. Verse 26. And as they were eating, Yahushua took bread, and he blessed it, and he brake it, and gave it to his disciples, and said, Take, eat, this is my body. And he took the cup, and gave thanks, and gave it to them, saying, Drink ye all of it. For this is my blood of the Brit Kadashah, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. But I say unto you, I will not drink henceforth of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. So again, we commonly hear people talk about the Last Supper. And what you actually see is, the reason why we keep in Pesach is the Last Supper was actually the Pesach meal or the Last Supper that the Mashiach actually had with his disciples. And his disciples are his students or his followers. So we have these terms that we have in the world, and they a lot of times, it's not for us to judge what they're doing, it's for us to shine a light to these facts. You've heard of the Last Supper, correct? Well, do you know what the Last Supper is? It was already written in the book of Shemot and Exodus. Messiah was following the laws. Messiah was keeping Passover, and that's the Last Supper that he dined on with his Talmudim and his disciples. So we say we're followers of the Mashiach. He was trying to lead us back into the Most High, lead us back to Torah. He kept these things, all right? So going into the other portion, I give him a chance to catch up. Okay, so what we're going to do for the second portion of the Seder, so the first portion that we did was in remembrance of the actual Pesach, the Passover of the Old Testament, and the Brit Kadashah, we represented the last Pesach that Mashiach had with his Talmudim. And so another thing they do in churches commonly is called communion, right? So they want to do communion on the first Sunday, what do they call? Not make a mockery of what they thought they're doing what they think is right? But what they have to understand is to remove the leaven and to understand really what it's about. When they did communion, communion was happening when? What's commonly called communion took place when? Pesach. It was instituted on Pesach as a memorial between the Mashiach and his Talmudim and his disciples, remembering their time together, his teaching and what he taught them, and the mission that they were supposed to carry on. And that's why when you read further Matthew, he tells them that you go forth and you teach the commands to the people. You immerse them and you teach them the commands of the Most High. So this is what they're going to remember in the time they spent with him in this Last Supper. So at this time, this unleavened bread also, because the Mashiach was also called the bread from Shemayim. So when you go to the book of Yahushua, the 6th chapter, it's going to tell you about the bread of life. Mashiach said he's the bread of life. He comes from what's called Bethlehem, which is house of bread, right? He doesn't literally mean that you're eating him. This, again, is just a representation of you showing your outward or missional acceptance to who he was and what he stood for. So with his disciples, and when you read the book of Yahushua and John, we can't cover it all in one sitting, but it tells you that the Most High gave the children of Israel bread that came from heaven in the wilderness, which was manna. So the manna was a lot like what? Unleavened bread. They're bringing you out, and I'm giving you the bread that I want you to have. So they had the bread that the Most High was bringing down from Shemayim, and now Mashiach said, now I am that bread, meaning I'm the manifestation of what the Most High was trying to show you what you're supposed to look like. The process of all these feast days is to bring you back to your state of perfection, to be back in the image of the Most High. So I came in flesh, not that you eat my flesh, and that you just follow me and my own law. To follow me as I show you how to get control over your flesh and return to keeping the Torah as it's written. So while he was with his disciples supping, he said, this is my bread, this is my body. Break, take and eat. Most High blessed this bread that we're about to receive, and he said, break, take and eat. So if you want to just break your portion and just eat your portion just in remembrance of what they did at the Last Supper. again, everything we talk about parablade, throw alongside, right? So when we look at the blood on the doorpost, of course, you have some people that say, well, what y'all doing is cannibalism. We literally know this is only bread, right? The law tells you can't eat people, so we don't eat people. So it's just a representation. And nor the commandments also tell us that we cannot have or we cannot drink blood. So this is fruit of the vine. So he said, this is a remembrance of me, because we remember this time we shared together. So this cup of yayin or this cup of hagafain or fruit of the vine that we're having together, this is for remission, the remembrance of the remission of sins. He said, take ye and drink. So in remembrance of that Last Supper. So, Mishpachah, you found for some of you first timers, you're partaking of your first Seder meal. Hallelujah. So, continue to enjoy your lamb, continue to enjoy your bitter herb, and whatever you're drinking at the table. But I have one last portion of the service before we close out. Some of you not going to partake of this portion. I myself didn't like partaking of this portion. And we do not force anything on anyone. Any portion of the ceremony that a person does not want to do, that's on you. But we're here to try to bring to what the Most High revealed to us according to his text. And the same attitude that you're going to read in the scripture was the same attitude that a lot of you probably going to have today. And you probably don't want to do it. Even Murray Dawood don't want to do it. So, y'all bear with me one time. You all right, Murray? All right. All right, so I'm going to the book of Yehuganan, John chapter 13. And I'm starting at 1. It says, now before the feast of Passover, when Yahushua knew that his hour was come, that he should depart out of the world unto his Father, having loved his own which were in the world, he loved them unto the end. And supper being ended, the adversary, the devil, having now put in the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Yahushua, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that it was come from Elohim, and he went to Elohim. He rising from supper, and he laid aside his garments, and he took a towel, and he girded himself. After that, he poured water in a basin, and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel wherewith he was girded. Then cometh he to Simon Peter. And Peter said unto him, Adonai, do you wash my feet? Yahushua answered and said unto him, What I do, thou knowest not now, but you shall know hereafter. Peter said unto him, You should never wash my feet. Yahushua answered him, If I wash thee not, thou hast no part with me. Simon Peter said unto him, Adonai, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Yahushua said unto him, He that is washed needeth not to say to wash. He that is washed needeth not to say to wash his feet, but is clean every whit, and ye are clean, but not all. For he knew who should betray him. So Mashiach washed his talmidim, or his disciples' feet. So we're not to the close, and we've eaten supper, so you ain't got to worry about touching feet and then, touching food. And this is a process that no man or woman actually wants to do, like wash somebody else's feet. I mean, husband and wives, it might be cool, or a child, a parent doing a child. But it's a very humbling process because it puts you in a state of a servant. But also, when he's saying that you've already been cleansed, you're not all completely dirty, but see, your feet travels the path. So our flesh sometimes, even if you've been immersed, which commonly called baptized, you've been washing yourself with the word, you've been immersing yourself in Torah and cleaning your way, there's still sometimes you get a little filthy. The path that you take, you might get a little off the path. So what Mashiach is doing is representation of still washing off that little bit of mess you still have on you, but it's also a form of humility. So at this time, for all those who would like to partake, and I would suggest you all partake, but we are about to actually do the foot washing ceremony, and to keep everything decent in order. If there's husband and wives, then of course we're going to do it that way. But also akim to akim and sisters to sisters, because we keep it straight up and down in the Hebrew community that we are part of. We ain't like some of them other brothers caressing female feet that ain't their wives. We ain't playing that game in here. So brothers about to wash feet, and brothers, if you have an isha, you're gonna do your isha feet, but you're not gonna get out of action, humble yourself and wash one of your brothers' feet and let your brothers wash your feet. But we will ask that the akim, if your isha is present, to please wash your isha. Come on, Ray, you okay? You okay, Maureen? So at this time we're gonna start handing out